So, okay, with all that, let's go ahead and talk about Sheryl Sims, which is why we're all here. She is a brilliant artist and a storyteller who uses art in part to convey messages and inspiration. And as she puts it, she does not shy away from emotion, but leans into it. She celebrates it and the perspectives that it provides. Sheryl is a descendant from notable plantation ancestors of the Mount Vernon and Woodlawn area, and today she'll be talking with us about those histories and her work in genealogy and preservation and connecting with other plantation descendants. And although she's relatively new to quilting, Sheryl has always had an artist's eye, and she studied environmental design at the University of Houston. She's evolved a truly unique style, relying on raw edged applique technique to layer fabric rather than only on stitching. And her pieces carry themes related to ancestry, faith, family, and current events. Sheryl's work has been shown at several notable venues in the DC area, and she has been featured in several news and TV articles. There's much more to this presenter, but I'll let her tell it. So Sheryl, welcome, and please take the floor.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody attending this Zoom presentation. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get started. So I was born in Landstuhl, Germany as a military dependent. My dad was an Army officer and we were stationed there for 3 years. So as I was doing my research for my genealogy research for entrance into a lineage society, DAR to be specific, I thought, well, I need to have a quilt about my beginning. So this quilt represents Landstuhl, Germany, and me as a, dependent. And the middle part is actually represents the U.S. military hospital there in Landstuhl, which many people might recognize the formation of it because that's the hospital all the troops fly into when they're coming back from war, or like when there've been hostages, they always fly them into this hospital in Landstuhl. It's huge. We can go to the next slide. So these are my parents. My father, on the left, both of my parents are deceased, and I really wish they were here to see this, but this is my father on the left, and I started making art quilts because I wasn't having much success with traditional quilts, and I belong to Arlington Quilt Guild, Quilter Unlimited Arlington Guild, and we always have people presenting every month on different areas of quilting. And so we get a lot of exposure, which is great. Well, I wasn't having a lot of success doing traditional quilting, but a couple times we had presenters that did raw edge applique, which is how I started getting into it. So I made this quilt of my father using, his shirt is from fabric from one of his actual shirts. And then the one on the right of my mother, I used a technique called trapondo. And what's interesting is every time I would go to my guild meetings, I would say, oh, I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to do that. And all the support I got from my guild was very helpful because almost every time I went, someone would say, well, you should try to do this, or have you tried that technique? Or I'd say, what is this? So almost every meeting I was learning, and all that brought me to where I am today, actually, because without that exposure, I would have never experimented with art quilts. So in keeping with my family quilts, to the left is a quilt of my siblings and me, and I really had fun making it. I was a little bit afraid to show it to them because you know how people can be, why did you make my hair like this or whatever, but everybody loved it, all 5 of us, and it just, I tried to capture certain things about each one of us. The middle quilt is of my daughter, and that was my very first art quilt. And my friends and guild members will recall, in fact, one of them told me they were laughing when they saw this in my presentation, because they remembered the day I came to the meeting was like, look what I did, because I always had these pitiful little 9 patches and different things, but I did this and I was so proud. And so that was my very first quilt, and art quilt, and much to my daughter's dismay, but I that one will always be very special to me. And the one to the right is a quilt I made for my youngest brother, and those are his 3 sons. So this quilt ties in to part of my ancestry search as well. It's a picture of me in the middle visiting my parents' grave at Arlington Cemetery. That's what it represents. I mean, the names are really on the front and back of the same headstone, but I go there a lot. And the quilt to the right of that is also where it represents my family. And I have a brother-in-law that's also buried there. And I really like that because it kind of has a Van Gogh look. My style is raw edge, like I mentioned, but I really, as one of my guild members said, I paint with fabric. And I thought that's really kind of true. I think the key to a lot of my quilts is finding the fabric that best represents the emotion I'm trying to emote, or looking at fabric in a different way so that it can become sky or water or grass. So I like that. And every time I look at that one quilt, it kind of reminds me of Van Gogh's style. The quilt to the left is represents my maternal grandmother's grave in Shreveport, Louisiana. And I went out there to visit it for the first time a couple years ago when I was doing some of my ancestry research. And it was just a surreal experience to see it. I was running all over the cemetery trying to locate that. And so I knew that I had to include her in my ancestry and quilt story. So this quilt is very interesting to me because it represents my DAR research, and I'm a prospective member in DAR in the Nellie Custis chapter. And our chapter is named after Nellie Custis, who lived at Woodlawn for so long, George Washington's niece. And what I tried to represent, the fabric in the background is brick. And it represents the brick walls many of us encounter doing research, genealogy research. And especially as an African American, I found this to be true because we don't have the documents as readily available. You don't have, your ancestors' real names. Many times they're named after plantation owners. It was a very sobering and difficult process. But part of this is actually my tree, my charts from my tree, just a portion of it because it's a huge chart, that one of my distant cousins that I met and got me involved with DAR, and we had been going to church together, she and about 6 other distant cousins all this time, and we didn't know we were actually related. But thanks to her, I got involved in this. And the African print on the bottom represents the African roots, and the little ledger there represents slave ledgers, because many times when you do the historical research, you'll find that they have the slaves listed, but the research is difficult because it might just be first names or whatever they call them. It's not easy. But the other symbols, of course, represent patriotic symbols of America, which is very important to DAR. And I will say that chart goes back from my daughter to my 10th great grandfather, who immigrated here from Ireland, and was a signer of the Great Charter and came with William Penn. So this quilt on the left represents my family tree, and it has some of my distant cousins, my family. It's not, it's not perfectly accurate in terms of placement, but I really just wanted a family tree. So I printed out all the pictures that I had of family members. A lot of them go to my church. Some are on my dad's side, my stepmother, my Hollingsworth cousins down at the bottom, my Moore family down on the other side at the bottom. It's just, when I look at it, it really makes me happy. And at the very top is my 10th great grandfather's headstone in Delaware, Valentine Hollingsworth. But if you look down to the left, there's my 3rd great uncle, and there's my 4th great grandfather, and you'll see the plantation house later in a quilt that belonged to him. The right just represents my African heritage. I don't know much about it. I've taken DNA. I know some of the countries where I have DNA from, but that just represents my African roots. The same holds true with these quilts. The one on the left, as I was doing my research, I just found myself thinking about my African grandmothers and how I wish I knew who they were. I wish I had names. I don't. I've met a 5th cousin from the Congo, and I've seen some family pictures, but I've never met, I've only met, I think, two or three of my 100% pure African cousins through my DNA research, which is fabulous. But I remember waking up one day, which is how I came up with the concept for most of these quilts. I would just wake up and an image would pop in my mind that I need to do a quilt about this, and I could just see it in my head, and then I would come in and create this. So that, and the women on the bottom show that women really rule the world. We carry so many people, literally. And the middle quilt shows conversations with ancestors. So somebody had asked, how do you get started with this? Part of it is talking to your family, thinking about the conversations. Most of us really start paying attention to our elders too late, and you need to pay attention to the stories that they're telling you about their childhood and their lives. And it was in thinking about that I decided to make this quilt with words of encouragement and love. The one on the right represents, me basically missing my mother, wishing that she was here to see, what I've been doing with my quilts. She taught me to sew back when I was in high school. And, I used to make clothing and stuff, but no one in my family quilted. The one figure on the left with just a partial arm represents a piece of me missing without my mother, but it also shows like her looking down on me. This is one of my favorite quilts. My 2nd great grandmother, Cheney Tillman, was a slave. And I met one of my cousins, I think he was my 2nd or 3rd cousin, who he since passed, but he remembers visiting Cheney when once she had been freed, and he was a little boy. And he would tell me the stories about her. And he said how, she used to love just gardening. She had this passion for gardening. He used to go spend long weekends with her. And I would try to imagine so hard her being in that place. She had a huge garden, he said. And so I came up with this quilt. And one of my dear friends now that lives in Louisiana, was a part of the Historical Society in Minden, Louisiana, Dubberly, Heflin area, reached out to me and was telling me how this quilt meant so much to her when she saw it. And she actually helped me get information on a plantation house, which you'll see later, and help fill in some background, gave me a cookbook that had recipes from my ancestors' family and the family that lived in the house before them, and I'm sure some of the slaves, because they were the ones doing the cooking. This is my 4th great grandfather's plantation house. It's called the Shadow House. It's since been bought by someone else and renamed, but I did get a chance to visit it a few years ago, and it was a surreal experience walking where my fourth great grandfather owned my fourth great grandmother, and she was a slave, and she had two children by him. And I actually stood in the room that they said she slept in, that kind of adjoined his room. And it was just a small corner. And walked around the yard, the plantation, what would have been having a lot of crops, where he grew a lot of crops, and well, I should say the slaves. And he was known as the model farmer of northern Louisiana for his practices, his very detailed practices. But he didn't have a lot of slaves, but my grandmother, I think, was one of about maybe 10, I think, that he had, and my fourth great grandmother. And this quote just means the world to me, because I tried to capture the mood of them working in the field. It wasn't a happy place. When I imagined it and tried to reconstruct it in fabric, I tried to capture the mood of a busy plantation, but it definitely wasn't a happy place. And I felt that, when I was there. So further back in my maternal line, I met more of my cousins and some of my DNA cousins, and I have them listed here. Charlotte Brown is the one who really introduced me to Ancestry and the DAR, and her sister Bonnie. Then I met some of my other cousins through DNA, Dana, Cindy, Natalie, and Valerie, and some who aren't depicted here, Jeannie Bales, who also attended church with all of us. But through that line, I'm connected to Hollingsworths. And to the far left, I went to a reunion there a couple of years ago. I was the only African-American cousin there, and I was very warmly greeted because they were like, we knew we had cousins, we just didn't know how to find you. But I found them, and we had the best time, and I tried to capture that in this quilt up in Wilmington, Delaware, where our 10th great grandfather's grave is. And I think the ones pictured here, I think were actually from the same line, from the same son of his. And the middle quilt just represents my constant search for the missing patriot and the connections thereof so that I can get into DAR. The quilt to the right, of course, is just represents the cousins that I listed above. I mean, I've met some of them face to face, others I've talked to on the phone. Dana actually is a quilter and comes from a long line of quilters, and gave me a quilt because I said I didn't have any family quilts, and she gave me one that belonged to her great great grandmother, and that had actually been on her bed. Dana's the one in the blue in the back. That had actually been on her bed as a child, and it is one of my dearest treasures, just knowing that she would give me something so precious. This is the Alexandria Quaker Meeting House, which is right next to, adjacent to Woodlawn Plantation. And my ancestry search took me there because I was planning a Hollingsworth reunion for last year until the pandemic nixed that. But in that search, I wanted to, because I knew we had Quaker early ancestors, I wanted to do a tour of the Quaker Meeting House. And I met Martha Catlin, who was very instrumental with connecting me with Woodlawn, and she traced my history and connected me. She's the one that told me that you have ancestors that are directly connected to this meeting house. Some of them helped build it, some of them attended it. I mean, that was an amazing discovery. I've met with them, wonderful group of people. I have many friends now from the Quaker meeting. And what's so ironic is that growing up in this area, back when I was a teenager, we used to drive past this going to Fort Belvoir and everything. And I never knew that I actually had friends that attended. I belonged to a mineral club, and one of the members and I are friends. And she's like, oh, when I was telling her about my history, you should come and visit. And then I never knew she was Quaker. And from that, I was like, I have to do a quilt of this meeting house because it's so important to my own history now. And to the left, we have Nellie. This represents Nellie Custis. My interpretation of her walking, if you go to Woodlawn and you're upstairs and you look out this back window, there's a clump of trees that I was told Nellie really liked because it reminded her of Mount Vernon. So I made this quilt for a DAR fundraiser. And to the right is the Mount Vernon Slave Memorial. Years ago, my mother and I belonged to an organization that did work regarding bringing recognition to African-American historical sites in Fairfax County. And we, in turn, were also invited for a ceremony that recognized the Slave Memorial. And this was back in 1990. And it was a really big thing at the time. Governor Wilder was there, some other dignitaries, and this group was a part of the ceremony. And we had tried to get, I think that at the time they were trying to get Nikki Giovanni or somebody to write a poem for the ceremony. And she wasn't available because she was ill. Well, I was out sick that day. I wasn't feeling well either. But I said, well, I write poetry and I'll write a poem. And I think, they were desperate. So they said, okay. So I did. I went up and I visited the Slave Memorial, which if any of you haven't ever been, it's amazing. When you go up the steps, it says faith, hope, and love. And the slaves are not buried right under that. They're just scattered on the grounds, which breaks my heart. They're just scattered on the grounds. Our pets were buried better. But when I got there, within 5 or 10 minutes, I wrote this poem that I'm going to read to you right now. It's called Tribute to the Past, the Mount Vernon Slave Memorial. And so it is with love. We gaze upon the Mount Vernon Slave Memorial, erected in simple tribute and dedicated in collective memory of our strong African ancestors, stolen from their native land and scattered upon the shores of an unwelcoming world which offered them nothing but suffering and exploitation, now lying in a peaceful, shady place beneath a calm they never knew. And so it is with faith. We believe in the dignity, the courage, and the strength embedded in the hearts and indeed the very souls of a people destined for greatness and undefeated by the times. Faith to see through the unending tears and relentless years a brighter day filled with the sun, which would warm the lands of a bitter world too cold to care about those that try to strip of the very essence of their being. And so it is with hope. We look towards a future that will allow us to stand as mighty as those protective oaks that guard the tombs and stretch their limbs as if to embrace the tender spirits encased in each ring of the monument's base, stepping up as if into glory and reminding us with its circular form that we too, as a people, are to stand relentlessly reunited, unfettered through the winds of strife, and face forward in what seems like unchanging times, to meet life's challenges and come full circle to greet our destiny here at the roots of a people too strong in presence to ever be forgotten. And so it is with pride. We dedicate ourselves to serve, as did our great African ancestors, but not as victims of a troubled past, but as heroes of today, faced with the challenge of serving as living monuments and constant reminders that, yes, we are a people of strength, strong in faith, hope, and most of all, love. And indeed, that we shall never forget. Thank you.
Cheryl, thank you so much. Your stories held me captive, and I'm sure I speak for the rest of the folks here on the call. Your art is just stunning. I was so moved and inspired by your full presentation and riveted And the reading of the poem, I had an opportunity to read it before, but hearing you speak it was really quite moving.
Thank
An
you.
unforgettable presentation. So thank you very much. We're really appreciative of you sharing all this with us, and I'm sure we're going to have several questions, but a few questions for staff immediately started popping up, so we're going to be selfish and start first.
Okay.
One of the things that two of us had, which was, how has this work motivated you? We see your inspiration, your stories, your poetry, your art taking off in the media, and a lot of people are asking for you now, and it seems like there's a lot of momentum going. How is this motivating you in what you want to do next, not just with your ancestors, but in terms of your message?
Well, it keeps me encouraged, number one. I've always felt that I had a hole. Just the way I grew up in the military, born overseas, moving every other year of my life, I never felt that I had roots. And this gave me an opportunity to feel that the void and to address things that were important to me, whether it's current events and the emotion that goes along with some of the painful things we see on the news, trying to share my family history with my daughter, with members of my family. And if anybody else is in the process of, doing research and things like that, not everybody is interested, not everybody shares your enthusiasm. But for me, it's very, very important. And I do not want my child, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, whoever comes along, to have to go through what I did, just trying to find my family story. I think it's important that we all know where we came from, know something about our history. And in doing that, just like me, you're going to find that you're connected to the greater world, a greater community. I have family I never dreamed that I had. It's just, that's what keeps me moving. And all of my experiences feed in my desire to make another quilt.
Oh, goodness. Well, and unfortunately, you have such great gifts that you're going to develop such a following. Obviously, you have already. So more advice. We've got several questions, and then we'll open the floor. But what's a piece of advice you would give to someone just starting out? You mentioned that you would be open to, helping others, and you do help others. What's some of the best advice you can give to those just starting out researching their ancestry?
The first thing I would advise is to talk to your family. They know your stories. You have to ask questions. Don't wait until people start passing or you're so much later. Like, you should start now. Take the time. I remember I had an aunt, and even our grandparents would tell us things. And at the time, you're young, you're like, okay, and you're not really that interested. You're going to be sorry one day. You should take notes. You should write it down. And then my other big piece of advice is, when you get your story together, I would file a copy with the Library of Congress, because unfortunately, a lot of times we do these things and then something happens, it gets thrown away or lost. But if you file a copy of your family history with the Library of Congress, it'll be secure there. And when some member of your family is doing research, or even somebody outside just trying to do like DAR lineage research, they will thank you when they find a treasure trove of information that you've provided for them and left at the Library of Congress.
Great advice. We're going to have a call to action after this little session with you, because you've given some advice that we all should probably moving along with. A couple of other questions. So we had talked earlier about your connections to Woodlawn, and you said you were beginning to see those threads. I mean, you have some pretty prominent ancestors that were connected to Woodlawn. Can you speak to that? Woodlawn being the broader site as it was back in its plantation years, as well as, today.
Well, I first visited Woodlawn some years ago, just visiting some of their various functions, but really through my research and some of the work I've done with other groups. I got to visit Mount Vernon and then the Quaker meeting house, and through them, I found out how they were also connected to Woodlawn. The Quakers were very involved in trying to teach people that slavery wasn't needed, that they could farm, and all that area where Woodlawn and the Quaker House was all farmland, to my understanding. And so I think that it's pretty ironic that the community service projects I did with my mother took me to the slave memorial, which, you know, I had visited Woodlawn before for their some of their programs, but then the connection and the strong relationship they have with the Quaker Meeting House too. All of that was newly discovered, you know, this year. Well, last year.
Yes, exactly. Well, we could hear your excitement as different threads started to come and you pulled on those threads. Thread, of course, being your metaphor that we're all jumping on, but it's really clear that the work that you've been doing has increasingly uncovered all sorts of leads that you've been jumping on. A couple more questions. What are the size of the various quilts that you shared today?
Most of my quilts are wall hanging size. Early on, which you'll see like in the second session, some of my more traditional quilts were bigger, lap quilt size. I can't. So I started, that wasn't really fun for me, but I started thinking after I was exposed to art quilts that, you know, the beautiful part is there are no rules with art quilts, and I don't have to be as precise. I don't have to measure. I don't, you know, I mean, my guild members will tell you the things that I learned just even a few months ago, like, you know, your scissors matter. You don't want to use your office scissors. You want to use quilting scissors, sewing scissors, and things like that. So, you know, what you use matters. And I just felt that working smaller was my forte, and just being more creative, not working with a pattern, not having to do something exactly the way somebody else dictated was for me. I just was thrilled when I attended a presentation with the raw edge applique. I knew I was on something then. And you know, since then I've made quite a few quilts using that technique. And I just think for me, it allows greater expression.
Okay, great. So we do have more questions. Hey, I just do want to check in. Winifred, your hand is raised and I'm not sure if you want it to be. Do you have a question? I think we're okay. So we do have another question. How do you get involved with or connect with the Quilter Society in Arlington?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. You know, our guild would love to have new members. You can go on the website. You could contact me and I will definitely make sure you get connected with the right person. But you can go on the website, Quilters Unlimited, and there's a list of guilds in various areas, and you can join. I also belong to another organization quilters can join called SAQA, and it's Studio Art Quilters Association. I mean, there's lots of them, but those are the ones I belong to. And we will be happy to have you join us. And I will just say this, when I joined, I was visiting a Quilters Unlimited quilt show at the Expo Center. And I was there with a friend who bumped into someone she knew, and she was a member of my current guild, and she invited me to join. And I just kind of laughed because I was like, well, no, I can't really quilt. I've made one quilt. It wasn't good. And she was like, it doesn't matter. Just come and have fun. And I must say, that has been my experience. I've made wonderful friends through the guild. I've learned different techniques. There's so many aspects to quilting. You will find your niche and your style, and people are so generous. Many of my quilts are made with fabrics that were given to me by my guild members. They taught me if I didn't know how to, you know, do a certain technique, well, try this, or come, I'll show you how to do that. I mean, you do not have to be a fantastic, amazing quilter to join. Come and join where you are, and just to have fun and grow and get exposed to so many aspects of the hobby.
Wonderful. So now, of course, this had to happen with a group that is into quilting and technique. So couple of questions. Are your fabrics painted? And can you talk a bit about the quilt making technique itself? Like how do you get such a layered, beautiful, vibrant look?
You know, my quilts are not painted. I have guild members who do incorporate paint. I mean, there's so many aspects to styles of quilting that you can explore. But for me, I just paint with my fabrics, so to speak. I find the fabric that fits the tone of my quilt. A quilt is 3 pieces, so you have to do a top, a middle piece, batting, and then the backing. So I lay out my scene. And I don't use patterns. I just freestyle, cut out what I want, place it, and then you can tack it down. There's different ways to do that, and then I quilt it. So,
couple
yeah.
more questions on technique. That's helpful. Sharing your secret sauce and your trade secrets, huh? So people soon, a lot of quilts and other art pieces are going to look like yours, I think. I don't think I'm going to try it though, Cheryl. I think I'll just look at yours.
Hey, if I can do it, anybody can.
I don't know about that. All right. So do you ever draw your designs before you quilt them? And, let's just start with that one.
Most times
and how do you make trees and rocks and flowers?
No, I just usually cut them out. I tried drawing. That's just too tedious to me. I just freestyle it. I mean, most of us know what trees look like. I just start cutting and laying it out and cutting leaves. And we've all seen rocks and mountains. There's no one way to do it. You can't go wrong with those types of things. I enjoy doing landscape quilts. Now, I did one quilt where I did try to make a little template because it was for a friend, which you'll see the quilt late in another presentation, where I did use a light box to kind of create a pattern for that particular one, because I didn't know how to cut out a dog. But but a lot of times with applique, you can use fabric. You can use the fabric cut out, like if you like a flower, you can cut that fabric out, that flower out. They call it fussy cutting, and then use that in your scene. So other people actually create it. I don't many times. I like to just find what I'm looking for, use the fabric a certain way to create that. But other people have techniques where they will actually create every petal of the flower.
Oh, wow. This is related to technique, and then we'll move on to a couple of other things. Do you put fusible backing on your fabrics? It's going deep, Cheryl.
I've done it. I don't. I mean, I get teased about this a lot, but I don't. I have Roxanne's quilting glue, and I dab it and I lay my images down, my pieces down, and then I sew them and quilt them. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
But you can use Fusible if that works for you. I've done it. Like I made some quilting postcards, which you'll see in the other presentation, and I used it for that. But that's not something I regularly use.
Okay, good to know. So shifting gears, how does one send or record family memoirs with the Library of Congress?
You can actually go to their website and they will give you all the instructions, and you can reach out to the genealogy library, and they tell you exactly how to do it. But you can start by doing it any way you want. I've typed them, you can handwrite them, and I did a little bit of both because I was hoping that if somebody came across it, they'd enjoy seeing my handwriting, not just typed pages. I mean, these are all things to think about, because when you research, don't you love seeing something some ancestor wrote? I saw a deed my 4th grade grandfather wrote in this beautiful calligraphy. So I tried to mix it up a little bit. They don't care. They will bind it and put a call number on it for you, but they will give you all those instructions when you go to the website.
Great. So probably 3 or 4 more questions, but I just do want to pause and say, Cheryl, we're going to save this chat because it really does have quite a few compliments to you in it. And this has obviously been a very insightful and touching presentation, exceptional. So as we go forward, I just want you to know that there have been quite a few comments around those lines.
Thank you. I
Okay,
look forward
I
to
think,
reading them.
yes, good. I think this is I like this question as well, and it is, if you are willing, what are each of your parents holding in the individual quilts of them, the quilt that you did?
Okay.
Also,
So,
mention the technique of the quilt and the mom. What did you
so my
mean?
mother was just holding flowers.
Mhm.
Um, and what struck me about that quilt is that, my mother was very stylish, and I just tried to capture that. Um, and so I had her with a flower, and like, you can't tell from the photo, but one day, if you see the quilt hanging, like, or she's kind of like, her bust line is filled out and it's 3D. Even the plant down in the front is filled out, because you stuff it with batting from the back, which gives it that 3D effect. So it's cool. My father, you can't really tell. He's just sitting in front of a plate with a fork and knife. I didn't say it was good, good, good. I did the best I could. That's supposed to be a plate with a fork and knife. Like, I got the idea from a picture where he and my stepmother were at a restaurant. And I just kind of, artist license, and I kind of adjusted it for that scene, because after my dad passed, I really, wanted a quote with him, and she was nice enough to send me one of his shirts, and that made it all the more special to actually have his shirt, incorporated in that quilt.
Very much. That this slide alone does make me sort of want to get into this so that I can do the same. Take those special pieces that you have. Another question. Are you going to do any more Van Gogh-like quilts?
You know, I
Eye
certainly
popping.
want to. He was my favorite artist. I love Impressionist art, and he was certainly um, amazing. But it's a matter of also finding the right fabric with that feel, the Van Gogh colors. He was famous for those blues and yellows and things like that. So every time I see something that reminds me of his work, I do try to snatch it up. So, stay tuned. You may see some more Van Gogh work
All
incorporated in
right.
the quilts.
So this is about your next presentation. Is the topic the same or different? And I'll just plug in a little bit here. I think that we had titled that around family and faith, and kind of your personal response to current events and how you use your art there. Do you want to touch on what next week will look like?
Yeah, so next week it will be different, and I hope all of you all can join us again next week. Um, I really enjoy the next section too, because it's shows a freer style of my quilting, things from my imagination, um, uh, some of the political things that kind of went around, not politics part, but just, we've all been through a tough few months in summer. So my feelings do come out in some of these quilts, and some of them, when I was feeling really sad, I tried to make a quilt that was very colorful and joyful, and you'll see that. Yeah, I use quilting as an expression of my emotions, and I would jokingly tease my guild members, because they're all very talented and skillful. That where I lack in skill, I do have emotion, and I think it shows you that you don't have to be perfect or great to do something. It's more important to express yourself. And that's all I've done with these quotes. I never dreamed I would be really showing them to anybody outside of my guild and some of my poor friends that, when I make them, look what I did, look what I did, but even my coworkers, they've had to be a part of my sharing too, and everybody's been really great in encouraging me, and really appreciating my art and my hobby. It's just been a wonderful experience, and all because I needed to get it out. And that quilting was like therapy. I mean, when we were, in here for so many months, and not being able to connect, with people one on one. I mean, I thought quilting was a perfect outlet for some of the ways I was feeling and things that I was experiencing and seeing.
Well, we're also eager for next week to hear the rest of the story. To answer a couple of other questions, yes, we will be posting this video. It will stay up on the website for a long time, Cheryl, so everyone can come and see it. And I think that we have a wider distribution. We'd like others to see this who weren't able to make it. And then Trinity, who has, again, was the one responsible for arranging this session. She's posted where you can go look to see the presentation, and as well where you can register. I do want to mention the presentation was excellent, including the way that the slides were shown. That was Cheryl and Chriselle Hicks, who works at Woodlawn as part of our core management team. And so there you can kind of see everybody's involvement there. Let's see, I do want to mention that you have so many compliments in here. So I hope that you do know, I don't want to cut off the questions, but I hope that you do know how beloved your work really is, and that this momentum will only keep getting larger. One last question here, although we can, if anybody has any other questions, go ahead and put them in the chat now and we'll make sure to get to it. Is your work now in museums?
No. No, they're not.
Well, we do know that we are doing, once COVID lifts, then we will have Cheryl at Woodlawn for an exhibit. So that's one museum we know of.
I do want to say one thing. You're going to see next week, and I'm only mentioning this because I see Marilyn Owendorf, and I'm not sure she'll be on next week, but we're former co-workers, and she's a fantastic quilter, and she actually did the quilting on one of the quilts you'll see of mine in the next session. And I just wanted to mention her in case she's not on next week, because I don't do long arm quilting, and the people that do know that's a skill. So she and another friend, I don't know if she's on, Judy Balance, did some of my long arm quilting on a couple of my quilts, which you'll see in the next session.
Great. So before we close here, does anyone have any additional questions or comments? Please do type them in the chat. And if for some strange reason you haven't been able to find the chat, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask that question. Any other questions? So if a question pops up while I'm talking, then go ahead and please, we'll take one more question. But let me do mention that if you're interested in hearing about the programming that we do at Woodlawn and Pope-Leighey House upcoming, it's always being added. So please do follow us on Instagram. Please do follow us on our website. I think Trinity put our website in the chat. And then here's another thing that we're really serious about asking. If you have thoughts or ideas about programming, if you know of research, whether it's ancestors and descendants or research around the community that we need to know about, or if you have insights that you want to share about Woodlawn, about your stories, your history that maybe could relate, please do get in touch with me. And Trinity's got the email, I think, in the chat. Do get in touch with any of us. And we'd love to hear from you, because this is first a community, and what Woodlawn does is for community first. And so we do want to hear from you. We'll post this on the website. And before we close, I do want to say that call to action that I feel like Cheryl was saying to us, and that is start now. Let's just start now, right, Cheryl? Any last words you want to share?
Just ask those questions, write them down. Contact me if you want to join the Quilt Guild. We'd love to have you. It's a wonderful way and a different avenue of documenting your family history.